In the past 18 months, Republicans have gathered 3.8 million documents and 80 hours of witness testimonies on a baseless inquiry against President Joe Biden. But now that Joe Biden is not running for president, they've ended their political impeachment stunt. Now, the investigation that we should be focusing on is Jared Kushner and his $2 billion from the Saudis just months after leaving the Trump White House. Now, new reporting today from the New York Times has noted that Jared Kushner collected $112 million in fees, but hasn't made a single dime for the Saudis through this fund. Now, we don't know if the Saudis expected profits or if they just wanted to reward Jared for his service. This $2 billion payment for this investment fund represents the reward of sitting next to former President Trump and pushing for pro-Saudi policies. During his time in the White House, Mr. Kushner consistently ignored the recommendations of top foreign policy experts at the State Department and even ignored the warnings of Trump's own Secretary of State. These conflicts of interest and the national security threats are obvious, but House Republicans are not interested in uncovering the truth about Kushner's actions or the suspicious actions of the Saudi government and other foreign governments. While the Senate is beginning to finally move on this investigation, the House has done nothing. Mr. Speaker, we can no longer wait to hold the Kushners accountable for their shady dealings. Our democracy is not for sale, and we need to ask ourselves the question: why did Jared Kushner receive $2 billion for an investment fund just months after leaving the White House? The American people deserve answers, and we should never stop until we get them. I yield back. Madam Speaker, I rise today to urge House Republicans to investigate one of the modern American scandals and political cons. Now, why did the Saudi government give Jared Kushner $2 billion just months after he left the Trump White House? Kushner, who oversaw Middle East policy for his father-in-law, has enriched himself and his family in what is clearly an enormous grift and likely serious conflict of interest crimes. So let's review. First, Jared Kushner conned his way to a cushy White House job with no clear job description and no experience. Then he took it upon himself to prioritize pushing out the U.S. Secretary of State so he could cozy up to the Saudi government. Now, once he was close enough to the Saudis, we have records of a $110 billion arms deal between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia that was inflated at the direction of Jared Kushner. Then, mere months after Kushner exits the White House, what happens? The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia overrules his own investment advisors and sends $2 billion to Kushner's company's bank account. Now, in the exact words of Republican Chris Christie, who I'll quote, "The grift from this family is breathtaking. It's breathtaking. Jared Kushner and Ivanka Kushner walk out of the White House and months later get $2 billion from the Saudis." Now, some colleagues from across the aisle have explicitly said the Kushner family has engaged in business dealings that may have crossed the ethical line, and I agree, yet they refuse to act. Is this the same party that's obsessed with President Biden's family? And the American people deserve answers, and I urge my colleagues across the aisle to answer all our calls and subpoena Jared Kushner's company once and for all. Thank you, and I yield back. And what I want to know is why we're not actually investigating real family corruption. They want to attack President Biden's family, who actually never worked in the White House, which is incredibly hypocritical. Yet we have not yet talked about these guys that actually worked in the White House. And in fact, I want to talk about Jared Kushner, who's right over here. We know that Jared Kushner, who's Donald Trump's son-in-law, was given enormous power in the White House. When Jared joined the White House, he was so unfit and unqualified, and with so many conflicts of interest, he couldn't even get a security clearance. His father-in-law, Donald Trump, had to intervene, overriding national security officials. We also know that just months after Jared left the White House, the Saudi royal family gave him $2 billion, with a B, into the Kushner hedge fund. And right now, Jared is pocketing an additional $25 million a year in fees. This is a man who was put at the head of Middle East policy in the White House. We know he personally intervened to give the Saudis a $110 billion arms deal that was opposed by actually folks all across the government. He supported the Saudis with their brutal war in Yemen, even after they murdered Jamal Khashoggi, a journalist, of course, who was an American resident. The Saudi crown prince bragged to other heads of state that Kushner, and I quote, was in his pocket. Even Trump's first Secretary of State complained that this is inappropriate. Now, Jared delivered for the Saudis over and over again, and he was rewarded. Even advisors to the crown prince advised against the $2 billion hedge fund investment, yet he went forward anyways. So we know that Jared Kushner, a senior White House aide and Donald Trump's son-in-law, was doing favors for a foreign government. Now, this is actually an enormous family scandal that this committee should be investigating. And I think Chris Christie put it well when he said that the grift from this family, the Trump crime family, in my opinion, is breathtaking. You also need to take my word for it. But this is actually what our committee chairman actually said about the Kushners. I'm just quoting our chairman. I have been vocal that I think what Kushner did crossed the line of ethics. Now, Mr. Chairman, I completely agree that the Kushners crossed the line of ethics, and I want to know what we're going to do about it and when that hearing is actually going to be here in front of us. See, if we're not too busy, maybe next week during the Republican MAGA shutdown, we can actually have a hearing with Jared Kushner, which is clearly in a very corrupt arms deal here, a deal around his investment firm. And the chairman can also be involved in that since he also thinks there's problems. Now, we do know today that we're not here because of any wrongdoing of President Biden, but because this is all part of Donald Trump's campaign. And his most extreme allies, including some members of this committee, are now retaliating. In fact, some members have been trying to impeach the president since day one. Now, this is a tweet here. I'm going to read it. It says, 2 years ago, I introduced articles to impeach Joe Biden on his first full day in office. We will impeach Biden, bolded with an exclamation point. And you see the actual resolution here. So we have the receipts to prove it. There really is no reason why. They don't care why they want to impeach the president, but they've been trying to do it now for years. Here you have, of course, a member of this oversight committee posting about introducing articles of impeachment on President Biden's very first day in office. And now the Speaker of the House is empowering these people in a desperate attempt to keep his job. Ultimately, the person pulling the strings here is Donald Trump, a dangerous man facing federal and state indictments who's out for revenge. And he's been doing this his whole career. And I want to show you a second tweet, again by a member of this committee. They're trying to expunge Donald Trump's impeachment, as you can see here, which is also unconstitutional. I'm going to read this tweet. Expunge the wrongful Trump impeachments. Impeach criminal Biden. These are political stunts to appeal to an extremist base, and they seize control of this conference. If we don't act, they'll threaten our democracy again. This impeachment is a farce with no evidence, and with that, I yield back.